I must say that my experiences in terms of the Hizmet movement, it is going back to the idea that Islam is a way of life. It's lived. And as a consequence, you set an example. Personally, I have read some of his writings, and of course I have lots of things. It's an issue, and certainly the high schools and preparation schools, exam preparation schools, which I'm Fran Hassencahl, and I'm in the Department of Communication and Theater Arts. I'm a professor there, and I teach courses in intercultural communication. Just finished teaching a course, team teaching a course on the Arab Spring, and I also direct a minor in Middle Eastern Studies, and I have been to Turkey a number of times in various capacities as guest lecturer, traveler, visitor, etc. And during a period, I guess, about 15 years, I came into contact with the Gulen Movement and had some opportunities to observe and to also interact with people in the movement and have, formed some opinions and positive opinions. That's not to say that there aren't some issues that I think could be improved, but by and large, I have, and this is partly out of my own college experience and tradition, can resonate with the concept. My undergraduate college, the motto was culture for service, and lots of my colleagues did overseas and domestic projects very similar to the kinds of things that people do in the Hizmet movement. So I can kind of resonate with that experience. As far as the leader of the movement, and yes, leader, but on the other hand, there are many leaders in the Gulen movement. It's not a hierarchical, structured organization as some organizations are. I have not met him personally. I have read some of his writings, and of course I have read lots of things, both pro and con, about him as a person. But I must say the things that have about him that are con are lots of times, as some of my colleagues have pointed out in various books, scholarly books, are pretty baseless as far as the cons. And I would say overall, in terms of his being an inspirational leader, overall in terms of his vision, I feel quite positive. Well, I would have to say in the area of education, the most common and most important kinds, in my mind, contributions of the Gulen movement, because I'm an educator. Of course, I'm concerned about that, not only in terms of American education, but worldwide education, and particularly in Turkey, where getting into universities and being well enough prepared, we have this problem too, is an issue. And certainly the high schools and the preparation schools, exam preparation schools, are an important factor in the fabric of the education in Turkey in terms of not only preparing students, but I've met many students who, had it not been for extra financial help or the ability to board, they would not have been able to go to a high school that would have equipped them for college. And I think that's very important. And if you spread that out into other countries, which the Gulen movement is doing, they're basically working with those that are underserved and those who have limited opportunity. And the name of the game these days is you have to get training and education. I must say that my experiences in terms of the Hizmet movement, it is going back to the idea that Islam is a way of life. It's lived. And as a consequence, you set an example. I have not been proselytized by people in the movement. Like I said earlier, I resonate because of that concept of service, that concept of as it were, pleasing God by the kinds of activities you do, by the going in and giving a helping hand, whether you're removing cataracts from people in Ethiopia or you're setting up a school. And I've seen, and heard about various activities that are done, particularly in underserved regions or in the stands after the Russians pulled out. And in contrast, Saudi Arabia went in there with mosques and with Qurans and evangelized and heavy dose of evangelism, whereas the Gulen people went in and provided the kind of services people needed. And that's, I think, a very important difference to make. For the most part, Islam is not a missionary-oriented movement. I'm very impressed by the interfaith activities of the Gulen Movement and have had the opportunity to participate in some of those activities. And I think that this is not only in terms of dispelling understanding, but providing relationships and opportunities to work on problems that aren't just necessarily based on one religion or another religion. And the only disappointment I have is that I think we're doing a good job of building relationships, but I think there needs to be a little more discussion in terms of some theological issues and understanding. And I think that some of the Gulen students need to also, in addition to studying Islam and the teachings, look at some of the teachings that are in other religions. Basically, a kind of looking at and understanding and reading does not mean that you're moving to that side. It just means I'm now better informed. In the same sense that particularly Americans do not know very much about Islam. I find that some of the people in the Gulen movement do not know very much about Judaism or Christianity. And I think that it may be useful to sometimes move a little more beyond the kind of sharing of ceremonies and holidays and meals and these kinds of things to some actual discussion about some of the tougher issues. In terms of Hizmet's relief activities, I mean, this fits into the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition of charity, giving alms, zakat, what have you, but certainly that is a long-standing tradition, and it also gives people the opportunity to participate for a brief period of time. If you're going somewhere to do cataract surgery, you're there for a week and then you're back home again. Or if you can't go for lots of reasons why you can't just take off, a year or whatever, particularly if you're established with a family, but you can donate either money or materials or whatever, and I think that's important. And it also makes for dialogue, and the fact that groups go in and work with the population after some kind of natural disaster. This starts to open up dialogue between people. We saw this happen, albeit kind of slowly, with the Greeks and the Turks in 1999. But I think there is, and this is true often as you're going on the road to democracy, you start to see conspiracies, and you also want to blame other people for your shortcomings or the things that you may have wished had worked out differently. And in some respects, I'm seeing this happening, and this has happened in our politics. This happens in other people's politics too. The kind of scapegoating, blaming, trying to duck responsibility for bad decisions that you've made. People have to remember that the Gulen movement is basically a civil society movement. And as a civil society movement, individuals are going to participate in politics and political activity. The organization may not be doing that because of the separation of church and state, but individuals are free to do what they wish, and The Gulen Movement is not a centralized movement, so people cannot necessarily say, if you're in the government, I speak for. And they certainly have the opportunity to lobby and to lobby their representatives in the parliament. And I don't see the Gulen Movement doing anything differently than the American Medical Association does, or the National Rifle Association does, or the Red Cross does in the United States. This is how you get, as a government official, information about what the population is thinking. And you need to be open to all groups in your population, the Gulen Movement and the anti-Gulen Movement people, and the people who are advocating building doing an agricultural project somewhere in the eastern part of Turkey. And that's part of how democracy works. There's this back and forth dialogue, and if you start blaming and you start scapegoating, that ends the dialogue, which means you may be missing out on some very important information that you need to hear.
And I think that Mr. Gulen and the Hizmet movement recognizes the pluralism as inevitable in the world and says, let us learn to live with that, rather than to imagine that we can stuff it all back in the box.
I think the fact that schools are everywhere, that Hizmet has really committed itself to these schools, I think is terrific, you know, around the world. And I'm particularly happy to see them in poor areas where kids would not have the kind of quality education they're getting from the Hizmet schools.